Um, um, my name is Al Milgrom, Albert Milgrom. Um, I live at 1030 16th Avenue, Southeast Minneapolis, Minnesota. I've been here for since 1967. I grew up in a town called Pine City, Minnesota, 1922, November 21, 1922, Scorpio Rising. I've been living in the Twin Cities off and on since about the 1960s. I graduated from the University of Minnesota in 1947 with a 3-year interim during World War II. In 1943, I enlisted in the Air Corps. I was a photographic officer. I did aerial photography and ran a photo lab. I came back after 3.5 years, including a immediate post-war occupation of Japan. Okay. Came back 1947, end of 46, finished at the U in 1947, became a newspaper reporter, basically in California, San Rafael Independent Journal, being advised if you're going to go into journalism, the best apprenticeship is with a small newspaper, small daily. Worked on the San Rafael Independent Journal for about till early 51, and decided I'd gotten married in the meantime during the war, and my wife, her grandparents lived in Sydney, Australia. They wanted to see the grandchild who was born in 47, Jacqueline. So I gave up the newspaper job and went to Australia, lived in Australia for about 2 years.
Okay, so let's just take a quick break, and I'll interject that I'm Rob Hahn, and today is December 14th, 2018, and we're talking with Al about Dinkytown. Do you remember your first impression of Dinkytown, and what was it?
Well, as I, having graduated Pine City High School, I enrolled at the University of Minnesota in 1940, fall quarter, and that was my first basically awareness of a place called Dinkytown. I can't remember if it was called Dinkytown, what year Dinkytown got its current name. As a high school senior, I'd come to the University of Minnesota a couple of times. I was interested in athletics and track, so I remember spring of 1940 coming down that they had the Olympic tryouts at the university, and at that time I probably circulated through Dinkytown, but I really didn't get an impression of Dinkytown until I enrolled in the fall quarter of 1940. I was under, at that point, tuition was $25 a quarter. And for $10, I think at $10 a quarter, you could eat at a house that many students students ate at, Mrs. Hanson's eating house. It was on the corner of, right now, just across the street from what then was Marshall High School. And many of the, I had enrolled in the Institute of Technology as a chemistry major. And so during the lunchtime breaks, many of my colleagues and fellow students would go to Mrs. Hanson's house and get really good old-fashioned meals. There must have been 100 students that were signed up there. I lived in a rooming house on 7th Street Southeast. I think it was, well, I know where the place is now, but I don't remember the exact house number. Some of my fellow high school buddies also enrolled at the university, and many of us from that Pine City district, high school district 25, lived on 7th Street. There was also some of the kids that we bumped into from the Iron Range. Many of them, a couple of them were young Finnish ethnics who lived on the same street, so we all had a sort of our own geographic rooming house that we lived in. I roomed with a young fellow, Al Kinsel, a Bohemian Czech buddy from high school, and in the house on, I think it was like 10007. So it was on 7th Street. It would be 7010. And then next door was another friend from Pine City. Well, he lived in the same rooming house, but he had a girlfriend in the next house. So between going to parties, finding girlfriends, we were all sort of 17, 18. I was 17 at the time. And we'd do our shopping in Dinkytown, or go to the restaurants. There was Bridgeman's Cafe.
Let's talk about Bridgeman's. What are your memories of Bridgeman's?
Well, Bridgeman's, pretty sharp memories. There were about 3 different, what do you call them, places you'd sit. At this point, my recollection for precise housekeeping, precise interior decoration terminology escapes me, but there were 3 counters, and I usually sat at the furthest counter against the wall. Many people from the university area, especially from the hall where the English department was, is across the street from Moody's Bible Center. You know, the one with the big round dome? That's Falwell Hall. So many of the people from that part of the university would come to Bridgeman's. I remember very religiously, about 3 times a week, the members of the Minneapolis Symphony Orchestra, in those days it was called the Minneapolis Symphony Orchestra, under Dimitri Mitropoulos, that first couple of years before he went to the New York Philharmonic, would come to Bridgeman's and have lunch. I remember there was a fellow that played the bass fiddle, Arthur Gold, who with his wife would come to Bridgeman's and have lunch over there. He had to carry the huge big bass fiddle with him, parked there. Bob Dylan used to come into Bridgeman's back in the late 50s, early. So this was 1940. Dylan didn't show up until the 50s. So there was, I remember Bridgeman's, you'd get, I forgot, I remember if you had a little extra cash and wanted to splurge, they had a 3-flavor banana sundae, which was really special. But I guess most of the time we would end up with maybe cocoa, hot chocolate for lunch. What did Bridgeman's have for lunch? Well, you could get, I remember also cheese sandwiches, melted cheese sandwiches. Anyway, Bridgeman's was very well patronized. That was on the corner.
Do you have
And
memories of
across the
the
street.
sitting
Pardon me?
when they wanted to get rid of McCosh books?
Oh,
There
that
a
was
sit-in.
later.
Yeah, let's focus, if we can. We can focus on that time.
Well, McCosh books, I don't think, in 1940, there was not, McCosh didn't open his bookstore, I don't think, until I became aware of McCosh in the early 50s, 1951, 52.
What was he like, in your opinion?
Well, he was, he's an ex-graduate student. He had this sign in the window, you need my books more than I need you. And he basically, he did not encourage a lot of book lovers slumming in his place. But he was well patronized by people like John Berryman, Saul Bellow. I remember Berryman usually going into, that was not until the mid to late 50s. Saul Bellow, who taught at the university, at least for the 1947 when I came back. I didn't take any classes when I went back to the U as an adult special in the mid to late 50s, but Bellow already was on a special faculty visit from the University of Chicago in 1947. I remember there's a very good friend of mine from the Minneapolis Symphony Orchestra. Now, of course, now I've got to remember the name because I was interested in photography. I remember shooting a lot of still photographs of, he was a violinist. He played in the third row of the violin section. His name will come back to me. Then there was another fellow, a couple of the fellows that in the symphony orchestra that would show up at Berryman's was, I'm trying to remember 70 years ago, so maybe, and I was thinking about this interview a couple of days ago, and these names came to me right like that.
Let's go back to the stories about...
I was going to tell you about some of the characters that came into Bridgeman's if you want.
Go ahead.
There's a few of them.
Yeah.
So, also coming into Bridgeman's, oh, darn it, I'll ask, it may come to me in a bit. This guy's a guy from Russia whose wife taught French and Russian at the university, and I had her for a class, and he always had a fixation of smoking a cigarette in the Russian style. He played third violin with, Paul Brissy. Okay, so some of the other people that came into Bridgeman's, one of them was Paul Brissy, Brissey, who was from Burlington, Iowa, but he happened to be the MC on the old university radio station, which was in Eddy Hall, KUOM. I don't know if you run into any people from KUOM at the university in that era. Well, Garrison Keillor started
sure.
out.
Yeah.
Are you going to doing Garrison Keillor?
We're trying to work on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, so well before Garrison Keillor, Paul Brissy used to do the radio announcements, and I used to hear the classic station in Pine City because Brissy was very elegant, had a great voice, gave a lot of information about the piece. So I looked him up when I got to the university. He would show up at Bridgeman's. Excuse me. And then there was his fellow co-chair at the in the third violin row, who was from St. Petersburg, Russia, studied in Russia, and had immigrated to the U.S., married a French teacher at the U, and whom I took Russian from. He would come in and he would always sit down has put his violin case down, take out his cigarette, and he smoked it in the Russian way. Apparently they allowed you to smoke in restaurants in those days, and no one ever complained. Across the street was Snyder Brothers Drugstore. It was one of several drugstores in Dinkytown. Kitty Corner was Gray's drugstore. I got a job my first quarter because $25 a month tuition was was somewhat of even a luxury for someone my father was making $150 a month in Pine City as a tailor, and $25 a quarter. I said $25 a quarter was somewhat not a burden, but it helped because students in those days could get part-time jobs. So I worked part-time as a dishwasher in Snyder Brothers, and other characters from Dinkytown used to come into Snyder Brothers and sit down. I remember Charles Bryn. Does that name ring a bell? Charlie Bryn. Well, he was an actor for a long time in the University Theater. The University Theater people, because of Charlie Bryn and some of his buddies, would come into Snyder Brothers and sit on the counter stool. So I got to know some of those, and Charles, I got to be a very close friend, like Sid Hartman's close personal friend. Well, through the many years. He died a couple of years ago. So at Snyder Brothers, I was getting to be fairly adept as a dishwasher. I'd get a couple of free meals, a free meal a day, and I'd get, I think I forgot it, maybe it was $10 a month or something. And another guy that would show up at Snyder Brothers and Bridgeman's was Bill Breer. I know he should be on your list because he worked in one of the bookstores. You mentioned McCosh's earlier. Well, the other bookstore, the main bookstore at the time, was Perrine's, which was on the corner of where on the Gray's Drugstore side of the street at the Kitty Cat Club. That used to be Perrine's bookstore, and also at Perrine's bookstore, the basement was a big art supply store, so that was well patronized. I'll let Bill tell you about the Perrine's. There's another bookstore that started a little bit before McCosh's in the late 40s called Hedden. Hedden's bookstore was on the north side of the block of the 4th Street, 14th Avenue, 15th Avenue block. Let me see if I got it right. The 4th Street ran, it was on 14th Street Southeast. 4th Street ran where the streetcar ran. There was a street, back in Dinkytown days, I don't know what point, they were taking away the streetcars. Did you get into the streetcars?
We haven't talked about the streetcars yet. No.
Were you interested?
Go ahead, yeah.
Well, so they had the big yellow streetcars that would come from St. Paul and then run all the way to Hopkins. So you could get on one streetcar. I had a friend in Hopkins, I remember, from Pine City. I wanted to visit him. He was Ed Prochaska, the druggist, big in farm labor politics. This was the era when the Farm Labor Party was very strong in Minnesota. And then in the mid-30s, of course, Floyd B. Olson was the governor, died in 1935. Jalmer Peterson was the editor of the Ascove American, which was only 25 miles away from Pine City, had become the governor, and there was all the politics of that era, which I don't know if you need to go into, between the Farm Labor Party, the purported influence of the communist local American left, which
What I would like to know is your observations, and if you ever came into contact in Dinkytown with Hubert Humphrey.
I used to see him. I used to see him at the university. He taught for about 1 year in 1943. I came in contact with some of Humphrey's buddies, there was Art Naftalin, who was a student at the university at that time. In the late 30s, I was aware of the fact that even though I was in Institute of Technology, the Minnesota Daily was a very lively student paper. These are spurious comparisons to the Daily today, but they had a number of writers who later became quite well-known, widely known in America. They had Tom Hagen, whose basis of stories of during World War II South Pacific became the musical South Pacific. Then there was Art Naftalin, was along with Eric Severide and a number of other Stan, the guy became the Moscow correspondent during World War II from Minneapolis. Anyway, there's a book called They Chose Minnesota you might want to look at. A professor at the university, anyway, it was, I've got it upstairs, I can show it to you. The thing is that some of these people would show up at the Snyder Brothers drugstore where I worked. Finally, Snyder Brothers had set up a couple of other branches downtown. They sold the Dinkytown store. Around the same time, before the before the Vietnam War, the National Camera had one of his first shops started in Dinkytown, the National Camera Corporation that's now in Golden Valley. So, I mean, maybe you might want to look at a map of like who's in which corner. So, I guess the last time I was talking about Hedden's bookstore. Hedden's bookstore was really, in one sense, a bookstore, a book lover's paradise or a book lover's nemesis. Because if you go into the store, he never had his books on the shelf. He did a lot of trade in used books because of students, many of the student population. The student population in the 40s was still about 35,000. It was still one of the quite large. You might want to check the statistics. So there's a lot of trade in used books, and on Hedden's bookstore, you'd walk into there, and you'd be careful where you step because you might book you'd need for class, and you'd be stepping on it, and it wouldn't be in good condition. But you could walk through Hedden's bookstore, which is a fairly long bookstore, and all the books were like about 2 to 3 feet deep on the floor. And you'd walk around, be careful, you'd reach down and say, hey, this is something I may need, and you'd pick it up. And Hedden was, he wasn't an intellectual, certainly not like McCosh, but he was a pretty enterprising used bookseller. There was another interesting guy in 1940s who had a bookstore. I guess it's right now where the sort of where McDonald's is. His name was Butwin, Butwin. I can't remember his first name, but he was widely known all over the country as a. He spoke Yiddish. He was a Russian immigrant, but he had. I used to go in there to look for books, and I was impressed with the fact that he did translations of many Yiddish writers, Sholem Aleichem, Mendel, the bookseller, and I don't know if he was that well known in Dinkytown, but he certainly had a national reputation. Some of his children became kids. I can't remember his. I think his name was Nate Butwin. There were a couple of other guys that used to walk through Dinkytown. I remember.
How about this guy named the Walker, Phil Holland?
Oh well, that's another story. That's another part of Dinkytown. That was Phil Holland didn't show up until till I became an adult in the mid-50s. Phil Holland used to work downtown, I think, at the library. He was a black kid, but he took a lot of university courses. He was really interested in French and Camus and the existentialists, and he used to hustle a lot of the white co-eds, and they liked him because he was pretty colorful. Later on, I guess I don't know where he got his money, but he seemed to have a clue of some friends who played the stock market. So he would always come in with the latest, or he would claim and give you the latest tip on the stock market. You ought to try some of these shares. These are going to go up. These are going to go down. And this is what I'm investing in. But most of his friends and most of my friends at the university had no idea about, the current state of American economics. But there were a lot of interesting young women who were ended up between them, and they'd all hang out at the what was that coffee shop before it became Cafe Extempore? What was the name of it?
The 10 o'clock Scholar?
No, that was on the other side of the street. So what I'm saying is, you guys may need a map of maybe Kristen, what's her name, at the book house would have a map of Dinkytown.
Right.
So, and then at least at a certain point. So I'm talking about Hedden's bookstore. That's here.
Yeah. I want to ask you about another character who
Oh,
wandered
yeah.
through the streets over time. Diamond Dave Whitaker.
Oh, Diamond Dave Whitaker. Well, he came on late in the scene. I know you guys have got him, and he's kind of he once he starts, it's hard to stop him from talking. He didn't show up until the 60s. See, in 60s in Dinkytown, I guess you need to divide the area. You got the 40s to the, to say 47 when I got out of the U, when I left Dinkytown, got a job in the San Rafael Independent Journal, and gone to Australia. On the way back from Australia, I got a job. A friend of mine at the university was on the Paris Herald Tribune, which was kind of the classic apprenticeship for a lot of some young writers. Art Buchwald was their big columnist. So anyway, no jobs in the Paris Herald Tribune. They didn't pay much more than $75 a month anyway, because on the way back from Australia, instead of coming across the Pacific, we, my wife and Ina and daughter Jackie, decided we'd go via Europe. So when we got off in Genoa, went to Paris, no jobs on the Paris Herald Trib. I went to Stars and Stripes in Darmstadt, Germany, 1952, into 52. Got a job as a copywriter, as a civilian, because they hired a civilian.
So when did you come back to Minneapolis?
I came back to Minneapolis. I caught TB in 1954. Germany, after the war, was rife with a lot of virus. People could cough at you in the street, in the tram, in Frankfurt. I was based in Darmstadt, about half an hour south of Frankfurt. So I caught TB. They didn't know exactly it was positive, so they sent me back to the U.S. because they had to check me out, which means I lost my my contract with Stars and Stripes. I was a year in the hospital. After I got out of the hospital, it was just before titromycin, so they had to surgery, recouped in St. Paul, and then got a job back on the St. Paul Pioneer Press copy desk, and worked nights till 2 in the mornings on the graveyard shift. during the day, which was free, decided to go back to the university, take adult special classes, work for an MA. So I was working for an MA in the Minneapolis, then I finally got a job in the Minneapolis Trib as a copywriter, copy reader, copy desk. And they said either become a journalist or an academic. So I decided I'd go the academic route.
Okay, so let's revisit a little bit your interactions with Diamond Dave Whitaker over the years.
Well, Diamond Dave Whitaker showed up on the scene in the early 50s. I had become a teaching assistant in the humanities program. That was in the the late 50s up through 1975. Diamond Dave Whitaker was a budding university student, but he only lasted a couple of quarters. And I think he went out, well, he didn't go to San Francisco until about the late 50s, or late 60s. But he showed up. There were a bunch of other characters that hung out in Dinkytown, maybe through the Scholar, and Dave Whitaker was one of them. So, but in the from about 1959 until 75, I was sort of based at the humanities program, trying to work on a PhD. Never got my PhD because I got too interested in film. And I guess that's where my career took a different path from journalism.
It was a good time to interject then. A staple of your filming career is Dinkytown Uprising.
Well, that was in 1970. That was 10 years later after I sort of threw my hat in with some of the local filmmakers.
Well, let's talk about the Red Barn protest. What are your memories?
Well, the memory, you got the whole film. The Red Barn is pretty vivid because I had I sort of as a second or avocation, I'd become interested in film and photography way back in the 40s. When I got out of high school, I had gotten a little baby Brownie camera, shot stuff in high school, and came down to the university. So I was actually, my first year at the U, in 1940, I took a photography class. Remember in those days, then I went down to Washington Avenue. I wish I could have found those. I had a bunch of negatives. When I went to Australia, they got lost. Anyway, so I was also always interested in photography. Cinema, movies were an extension. Of course, the big event in the 40s was 41, Orson Welles' Citizen Kane. So if you had seen the Orson Welles filmography, Citizen Kane, Magnificent Ambersons, and you were somewhat interested in literature anyway, or Americana, here was a vision of America that you didn't catch through at any point through literature. And so I found a real strong interest in film. We're talking about the 60s, and during the early 70s, the Red Barn incident and Dinkytown Uprising documentary. Well, by 1950s, when I started back at the university, I was interested in the photography department and the cinematography department, who had several luminaries. Alan Downs was teaching photography and cinematography. Jerry Liebling, who was a mentor to Ken Burns later, when he left in the late 60s to go to Amherst. Ken Burns was one of his students there. So between Liebling, Alan Downs, and a professor in humanities, George Amberg, I managed to get started the Film Society in 1963. I started showing movies and interested in movies because I wanted to see a lot of the stuff. Of course, in addition to Citizen Kane, one of the big shifts. Um, what's the term? Sea changes was the 400 Blows of Francois Truffaut and Cannes, 1959, Breathless of Godard, and especially Bicycle Thieves. So with all of the great film authors of the time, naturally you sort of imbibe their vibes anyway. And so this all led to wanting to make a documentary myself, which the first one finished was the Dinkytown Uprising in 1970. I started shooting because it was the student demonstrations at the U en masse, and I was teaching in the humanities program. I had the Eclair camera, which I managed to, which was a upgrade from my Bolex that I took to Russia in 1959. Grabbed the Eclair and kept it in my office, and every time there was some word about action in Dinkytown, I'd grab the camera and go down there. Well, just basically, this was an observational approach. I didn't know what was going to happen, so you just grab the camera and shoot in the street, which was very much the aesthetic of some of the early American direct cinema filmmakers like the Maysles brothers, Richard Leacock, Don Pennebaker. Of course, their model film was Monterey Pop, 1968. Anyway, I was shooting in 1970, and of course, over the years, 70 to from about February to August, when the whole Red Barn uprising sort of demonstrations for 40 days and 40 nights, and Dinkytown ended up with an acquittal for having jailed 40 of the demonstrators in August. So of course the film didn't get edited with friend Dan Geiger as the editor until 2015, almost 50 years later. So anyway, that's
okay.
Your question was back after a long curlicue discussion back to Dinkytown. So your next question.
Were you involved at all, or were you aware of the sit-in at Bridgeman's?
Oh yeah.
To save McCosh books.
Well, I did at that time. At the that came. I can't remember the date of that. I was aware of it, but could you refresh me on that?
Essentially, they were trying to push out McCosh to expand.
Oh, at Bridgeman's, right,
and,
right.
Many of the students, in support of McCosh, staged a sit-in where they sat and just took up tables and drank coffee or whatever for hours upon hours.
Yeah, was that? Do you remember the year?
I don't remember the year.
Well, I think that was a prelude to the Dinkytown, because at that point, Gray's Drugstore was it was still in business. Gray's Drugstore didn't sell to the Jason, what's his name, until many years later. But during the from February 1970 through actually April, when the occupation occurred, and ran up through end of the bust on May 10th. Everything was happening. That was the main plot action of the documentary, when students were occupying the buildings on 4th Street Southeast, which the Red Barn Enterprise wanted to sell and build a third hamburger franchise.
How about Breakfast.
Pardon?
Al's Breakfast.
Oh, Al's Breakfast. Well, Al's Breakfast. Al's Breakfast started in around 1937 with Al. I think of his last name, Bergstrom. It was nothing but an alleyway between the coffee shop that was that had become the extempore, and the was it the meat market? That's why I'm saying, you guys, if you had a street map, it'd be helpful to me if I had a street map. Then I could point to where.
Did you eat at Al's much?
What?
Did you eat at Al's?
Al's Breakfast. Well, off and on. This would have been in 1970s. No, I didn't. I was living up in this house here, 1030, and I'd come home. I had a couple of kids. My wife, Jeanette, was working as a social worker, so I was not a patron of Al's Breakfast until probably Jeanette left, which would have been the mid 70s. I'd eat there off and on, but and I remember Al Bergstrom as the cook until what's his name, Ray, took it over. And then Phil Bergstrom, his nephew. I didn't really get to meet Phil, who was a student at the university in humanities, until later.
Let's talk about the Scholar.
Yeah, well, the Scholar was basically, it's right now, the locale is halfway between the Irish bar across from the old extempore. Begins with B.
Blarney.
The Blarney, and then the Italian restaurant that just got sold. Now it's the Jimmy John's, but
right.
You
Used to be Vecchio's.
you can't find. I don't know if they ever put up a plaque. It wasn't the Dinkytown Preservation Committee interested in putting a plaque on the wall? This was the 10 o'clock Scholar. Anyway, the guy that shot some photos in there, Bill Safran. Have you talked with Bill Safran? Anyway, he was one of the. So the 10 o'clock Scholar was basically hole in the wall, a cafe with very meager furnishings, and where a lot of the early rock kids would come and play on their own for pennies back in the late 50s. And it was also a place where sometimes visiting comedians at one point, who was the satirist that, the name came the other day, that who died from an overdose. The well-known. Pardon?
Lenny Bruce.
Oh yeah, Lenny Bruce was due to show up at one point. There were a couple of other these. It was sort of the era of the one-man stand-up, not comedians, but stand-up commentators. Another guy would show up. He was well known on the tour. And also Dudley Riggs. You talked to Dudley Riggs? Anyway, he'd show up with the newspaper. They always start out with the Minneapolis Tribune. They read the newspaper headlines and then sort of go off on, careen off on commentary and very political commentary, usually dealing with the Kennedy administration, the Vietnam War, etc. Anyway, that was a Scholar was very casual place, and you'd just walk in there some night. They'd maybe have a sign as to what was playing that night. Marv Davidoff was as an anti-war activist, would also be involved with bringing people in. He had a couple of guys that would show up fairly regularly when they come to Minneapolis. The names escape me right now. And Dylan played there. I remember seeing him once or twice, not being very interested in the twang of his guitar. He'd also show up in Bridgeman's, and he was a big fan of the 3-flavor banana split. I remember he would sit at one of the counters, 2 counters away from where I would sit, and some of the people that I would meet from the symphony, and also Bill Breer would show up a lot, and we'd always like have a noontime chat, tete-a-tete. Anyway, that was the Scholar.
When you compare Dinkytown in its heyday to where it is now, what's been lost in your opinion?
Oh, I mean, a whole era has been lost, a whole generation. Dinkytown today is, 70%, I mean, maybe, I don't know what the percentage, you check the university, 50 to 70% students from, well-to-do students from Hong Kong and Beijing. They have no sense of Dinkytown. When I showed the Dinkytown Uprising, I stood on the corner of 4th and 14th passing out postcards saying, hey, this is part of your history here. You should know about this. I never remember seeing very many of the faces at St. Anthony, Maine when we premiered the movie. I'm planning to hope to get a DVD made. I still haven't gotten around it because maybe getting a DVD, what do you call it, screening at the Riverview and a DVD, what's the marketing term when you get your DVD out and want to sell it?
Streaming.
Well, no, there's a better more market term. Anyway, the precise term escapes me. Anyway, so where were we?
The change.
Yeah.
Oh, the change. Well, of course, it's radical change. They're now what used to be ma and pa deli shops, a butcher shop, Gordon's Bakery. Every I forgot what day they do a special on cookies and muffins. The hardware store. The sign is still on the wall. Then, of course, Gray's Drugstore. The bookstores, even the clientele. I mean, most people deplore what's happening, even though they got the Dinkytown Preservation Committee trying to save Dinkytown. Of course, they managed to keep the high rises out of 4th Street. But I don't know if Dinkytown is going to become I hope not too long, a memory, because certainly it needs, it's this important cultural and cultural locus for Minneapolis. It's the oldest part of Minneapolis. And the Marcy Holmes people want to preserve it, the Dinkytown Preservation Committee, and I don't know how they're going to manage to do that. They got certain buildings on the National Register, but the current population in Dinkytown with restaurants almost from the beginning of 4th Street, 14th Avenue and 4th, all the way down to Hummus, the Taiwanese restaurant, Starbucks, the Mideast restaurant, and across the street. Apparently, with the growing population of Dinkytown on the high rises, with the foreign students intro, it's a total different demographic. And I don't think they have a sense of Dinkytown. They don't have a sense of the stones over which they're walking has this Americana and this history that they could appreciate when they go back to where they came from, Hong Kong, Shan, Beijing, who knows where, outside of Madison. This is something that I would think they'd value, but they have no way to anchor themselves. So Dinkytown, whatever shards there are of cultural memory, needs to be still worked on and see where the foot in the door can be put to save what there still is.
Question about the political history. I know there were Trotskyites, there was everything over there. And also
The which
Trotskyites, you know, the communists.
oh yeah, right,
and
yeah. There was
also,
a
did you
small,
know Herbert
Dave Whitaker claimed to have been in a bit in cahoots with some of the neo-Trotskyites, but the Trotskyist element, which was used by the conservative legislature in the late 50s, had already dissipated, and during the I think the governor Elmer Anderson, during the post Floyd B. Olson era, the 37th, 38, this was an argument used by the right wing of the DFL, Jalmer Peterson, and the who became the governor around 1939. He was followed by Harold Stassen. Used this Trotskyist element, of which there were only not many who showed up. There was a Trotskyist, very radical Marxist fringe group that was associated with both the West Bank at the university and the East Bank in Dinkytown. But whatever happened to them, I don't know. Of course, you had the House Un-American Activities Committee in 1953, so many of them could have gone underground about that time, and they reemerged after McCarthy got ousted from the government. Not Eugene McCarthy, but
Joseph.
Yeah, Joseph. Could I have a quick question? Do you know Herbert McCloskey, Professor Herbert?
yeah, Herb McCloskey. I had some classes from him.
Oh, talk to.
You know about McCloskey?
I do a little bit, but tell
How
us
do you know about him?
from
Oh,
we talked about him. Yeah.
Oh, he went to Berkeley and
Yeah.
was part
yeah.
of the
Well,
Free
yeah.
Speech.
Well, Hy Berman. You know, well, of course, Hy Berman. If you find some of Hy Berman's history of Dinkytown. Anyway, Berman came into the political science department. McCloskey taught there from about 1943. I think he came on in 1943. There was another professor in the political science department, I think it was political, Cyril Black, so I guess remember the name, and who taught courses on radical thought and sort of neo-Marxism. McCloskey was basically an academic, but he was also an advisor at some point to Hubert Humphrey. Humphrey distanced himself from that wing of the DFL, from the Floyd Olson wing when it was just called the Farm Labor Party, and became later the Democratic Farm Labor Party. McCloskey then came back to the university in '47. He was basically gotten his degree from the University of Chicago, and the University of Chicago influence, which was very big in academia. I forgot who the president was of the University of Chicago at that time. Anyway, McCloskey, I remember taking some courses from him, auditing some. I think I either audited or took a course from him just before I went into the Air Corps in '43. And McCloskey, I think, was, I can't remember the story. Some of the faculty people, I think, weren't too approving. Also, in those days, also teaching in the political science department was, God, he was quite an influential professor. So it'll come to me. I think it was called Benjamin something. Well, back in those days, also part of the university faculty that taught briefly was Max, was it Hampelman? He became influential in the Kennedy administration. Yeah, there are many. Dinkytown, and just in general, Dinkytown, the university area in the 40s and 50s was, in retrospect, quite a cockpit of a lot of talent, literary talent. Of course, you had the whole university department under Alan Tate, Joseph North Beach. Who wrote? The guy from the South. Many of the Southern writers around Alan Tate had congregated at the university. Tate ran the English department for till the I think late '60s. John Berryman, who's now sort of kind of being rediscovered, came to the university in 1956. Was on the faculty until he died in 1972. So anyway, you got the political cadre, the literary people, the musical area. It was a rich place in retrospect. Nothing that I can see today even compares. The Brown something was the bar where on the corner where the library, kitty corner from the library, where presumably some of the football players under the Gray Fox, Bernie Bierman, and the Gophers of the 1940s used to hang out. Leo Nomalini, I don't know if that name rings a bell. He was an All-American guard. Of course, that was back in the days of when I was a student at the U, and the Gophers had some really stellar players. Bruce Smith, Paul. Back in the 30s, of course, Paul, the halfback, but a very good punter. Paul Giel. All of that. The university also was had national prominence. In addition to literary, music, the whole shebang.